Yes,
Uh,
my apologies. I had some technical issues to connect, so my apologies for this.
it's fine, it's fine. Now we formally start our web conference. Good morning, everyone. My name is Imran Sardar. I am a research analyst at the Institute of Regional Studies. I look after Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, and Nepal affairs. On behalf of the President, IRS, Ambassador Nadeem Riaz, my colleagues, and myself, I welcome all the participants of this web conference with Asanga Abeyagoonasekera. I'm sorry if I'm not pronouncing it well, from Sri Lanka. Before we proceed, I would like to share the Institute of Regional Studies vision. The institute was established in 1982 with a mandate to study neighboring states of Pakistan. Our slogan is Know Thy Neighbors. Since 82, this institute is carrying out in-depth analysis of the SAARC countries' foreign and national affairs, including geostrategic, defense, economic, cultural, health, education, environment, science and technology, and social issues. We also work on China. Our mission is to take an objective analysis of the developments in the region to offer policymakers and researchers the strategic insight, innovative ideas to deal with the challenges, opportunities, and complexities of the region. Today's topic is Sri Lanka and the Gunboat Diplomacies, Options and Challenges. The Sino-Indian military face-off at Ladakh in summer 2019 and the United States' confrontational stand on China and persuading India for a decisive role in the region has actually disturbed this balance of power of South Asia, in which small states finding themselves stalled. If you look externally, there are three major players in competition with each other on strategic domination on Indian Ocean: the United States, India, and China. In this tripolar competition, every state has its own geostrategic interests that sometimes fall in conflict with one and converge with the other. India working on its Act East policy to enhance its military and economic security. China has its own maritime Silk Road, which is half of the Belt and Road Initiative, and the United States with its Indo-Pacific strategy. India and China, however, are relatively new to this game. Their approach is more integrated and wider, especially China's. Indian approach is said to be security economic. The United States approach is comparatively specific and confined, not extending to Africa, Middle East. However, it is military dominated. The uncertainty revolving around United States-China relationship and China-India relationship after the military standoff have intensified the global great game at the Indian Ocean. Statement from the United States Department urging Colombo to take tough decisions ahead of Pompeo's visit to Sri Lanka in October 2020 has sparked a backlash in Beijing. In this evolving situation, the rise of Rajapaksas in Sri Lankan politics once again is a concern for New Delhi for obvious reason. The current regime is known as pro-Chinese. Mahinda Rajapaksa, the Prime Minister of Sri Lanka, has close relation with President Xi Jinping. China spent of billions of dollars in Rajapaksa's previous tenure to help build infrastructure of a war-torn country. Indian policies towards Colombo have been more interventionist as compared to China. The current Prime Minister is said to have lost 2015 elections due to Indian maneuvering. India, with a renewed role, is trying to patch up with Rajapaksas, resulting in India's first approach. A new Sri Lankan foreign policy plank is being portrayed as a strategic win over the Chinese overtures. Now debate has begun among the academics and politicians whether India, Japan, and United States backed projects would keep its momentum under this pro-Chinese regime or not. If you look at the figures, what China has offered to many littoral states in Indian Ocean region is much bigger than what IMF and other developed countries have given so far. Sri Lanka, the heart of tripolar maritime security framework, is gearing up to have a decisive position in the competing rivalries around that is neutral. Given the conflicting nature of relationship between the United States and China in Indo-Pacific region, how Colombo successfully navigate its foreign policy to meet this end is a big question. To discuss further, we have Asanga Abeyagoonasekera with us. Asanga is a Sri Lankan academic, geopolitics and foreign policy expert. He is author and a columnist, visiting professor for geopolitics and global leadership at Northern Kentucky University, United States, visiting lecturer at University of London in Sri Lanka, and also teaches security at the University of Colombo. Asanga has more than a decade of experience in government administration, serving as the head of several government institutions to position at the board level. Asanga is the founding Director General of the Institute of National Security Studies, Sri Lanka. He was a former Executive Director of the Lakshman Kadirgrama Institute of International Relations and Strategic Studies. The LKI is a renowned think tank of Sri Lanka. Asanga's forthcoming book is on Sri Lanka's geopolitical challenges. The title is Conundrum of an Island. He is already an author of his book Sri Lanka at the Crossroads, published in 2019, and another book Towards a Better World, published in 2015. With this introduction, I would like to invite our distinguished speaker, Mr. Asanga, to share his thoughts on this subject. Over to you, Asanga, and welcome to the Institute. Please, Asanga, switch on your camera. Yes.
Yeah. Can you hear me? Yes.
I can hear you.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you very, very much, Dr. Imran, and appreciate your invitation, as well as thank you for that introduction. I think it's a timely topic that you have sort of introduced, and I'm very happy to sort of contribute in this. So let me, I have a few slides. Can I share, Imran? Is that,
sure,
can I use the share screen? Yep. No,
yes, yes.
You have disabled on your side. You're enabled.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Now it's
yeah.
Enabled.
Okay. All right. Now I got it. Can you see my slides?
Yes, we can see.
Okay, great. All right. So I'll just quickly dive into the subject on Sri Lanka and the competing gunboat diplomacies around options and challenges. So basically, I'll highlight the few very important areas which Imran actually brought in his introduction on Japan, India, infrastructure projects, what's going on in Sri Lanka, Chinese footprint in Sri Lanka, the new regime, how they look at Chinese relations, and the Indian factor in Sri Lanka. So I think that's what I will be covering. As Dr. Imran mentioned earlier, so my previous book, Sri Lanka at Crossroads, basically focus on the triple sphere of influence in Sri Lanka, the Indian influence, the closest neighbor to Sri Lanka, Chinese influence, and the United States influence. So I project Sri Lanka as significantly positioned geostrategically in the neck of water that is connecting Indian Ocean to the South China Sea, which is going to be the most important the sea lane of communications, which is touching Sri Lanka, the Hambantota port, which is in the deep south of Sri Lanka, is an important, Sri Lanka is an important in the geostrategic location in the ocean. So I don't need to sort of emphasize on it. I think it's been spoken by many scholars as well as many reports. One of the reference points I bring to my students is about the Japanese bombing in Sri Lanka in the World War II. This is a very interesting an incident which happened, not spoken much, but the British Prime Minister, Winston Churchill, said this was a very decisive moment when you look at the Allied forces, because defending Sri Lanka was key. Because of its geostrategic position, because after Singapore was taken over by Japan, and then Sri Lanka was the next possible attack. So it's a significant moment in the Sri Lankan history. So Sri Lanka is geostrategically well positioned, as well as is an interest from the ancient past to the Second World War, to the back in the 70s and right now. Here is, I straight away would go to the Indian foreign minister's visit a few days ago, where he clearly highlighted basically New Delhi's concern about China was guiding the narrative about a project, which is a terminal project in Colombo Harbor, which is called the East Container Terminal Project. Where Japan and India and Sri Lanka, a tripartite agreement was signed during the previous regime, and which the present Gotabaya Rajapaksa regime has shelved it. It was under review right now. So here, Jaishankar mentions the importance of continuation of Indian projects in Sri Lanka. And this was what was reported in Sunday Times in Sri Lanka, saying that they worried that the rhetoric around the East Container Terminal initiative was promoted by Chinese intelligence with the objective of having it blocked. Now, whether China is involved in blocking the East Container Terminal was basically the rhetoric, as well as the discussion in Sri Lanka. Whether there is a hand in China in blocking this country, because next to the East Container Terminal is the CICT, which is the Chinese-run terminal. Now, if this terminal was given to India, it will be very interesting scenario, because we have two. One is India running one terminal, and next to that is the Chinese running, and this is again a very unique situation. Which I have written back then, which is about a year ago, about these two terminals and how they would function parallelly. More than China's hand, I think the block is from the Sri Lankan policymakers. As one could also point out, to the protesters of the Chinese projects in Hambantota. Now, in the previous regime, there was protests to block the Chinese project in Hambantota, which was when the 99-year lease was given to China. There was a huge protest. So one could point out that that was orchestrated by India, by the Indian intelligence. But here, more than the external factors, China or India, I think it is more about the domestic factors. In both cases, I think the domestic policy factors for blocking is more than the external factors. But not to fully discount China's role in the present context. Now I'll come to that, why I say that. This was the declassified information which was released by White House a few days ago. I'm not sure whether you've seen it, but it's very important that you read it. This was the Indo-Pacific IPSR, Indo-Pacific Strategy Report a few years ago, which was released at the Shangri-La Dialogue. But then this is a declassified version of the IPSR, basically Indo-Pacific Strategy. Here, when you compare the two documents, I've highlighted few areas, which is the declassified document highlights the importance of India, the role of India in the region, what India would need to do to basically to deter the Chinese predatory economic practices, the Chinese Communist Party's engagement, the inroads, the second circle, which I've put. Then again, the economic aggression by China. So it is about a containment, a significant containment strategy drafted by the United States, passed on to their allies, such as India, to execute, basically. So allies and like-minded countries. So where does Sri Lanka fall in this? Let me go to the next slide. Here it's clearly mentions that strengthening the capacity of emerging partners in South Asia, such as Maldives, Bangladesh, and Sri Lanka. They're reference to three countries. Why that is so important on partnerships, basically on to deter China. And there's reference to fusion centers on the maritime, which has been set up by India. Importance of basically supporting the fusion centers in basic coming years. Basically, it is about adhering to the norms, principles, and standards and of the rules-based order, and why Sri Lanka needs to, and an important strategic partner needs to be with the democratic or the liberal, the rules-based order. Here it's a few months ago, the last, the visit of the, I would say by Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, the high-level visit by US delegate in Sri Lanka, where he clearly highlighted the Chinese projects. There is on a significant threat to Sri Lanka's sovereignty. Where he mentions that lawlessness on the land and sea, that the Chinese Communist Party, he refers to the Communist Party. He is a predator, I quote what he has said. Now, if you read Jake Sullivan, who is the National Security Advisor who was appointed recently by Joe Biden, the incoming president, today, he clearly mentions the Sullivan. He was quick to identify the past limitations of US foreign policy. And this I have to sort of appreciate his quick thinking. The foreign policy, which was to ignore its allies, while the US has gone alone in its trade fight with China, I agree with Jake Sullivan in here. It was a lonely flight, which Trump took. Not many allies did support, although the allies was there, but there was not much of support. Perhaps rhetorically, but nothing in action. The NSA, I think the rallying other like-minded democracies is really important. What the NSA basically highlights. So whether the Trump's policies on Sri Lanka or on Indo-Pacific at a larger geostrategic connotation, whether will it continue? Yes, I think it would continue, but in a much stronger way because of the clear. I think Trump's policy was more isolationist position. And so he would engage with democracies, democratic values of the country, whether there is an malign economic practices in the country, I think, on the human rights issues. So Biden will play a more active role than Trump. So there will be multiple minilaterals, since regionalism is something that we speak about, which we want, but it is absent in South Asia. As you can see, SAARC is no more. And it is quite sad that a region with so much of prospect, wealth of youth talent, that regionalism is absent. So there will be many minilaterals, such as the US, Sri Lanka, Maldives, the defense agreement, which was recently signed to share intelligence on extremism as well as on countering terrorism, which sort of, I think, are good, I would say, the right steps to go to develop partnership within country, because Sri Lanka faced, as you know, one of the largest terrorist bombing a few years ago, killing many people. So these are important initiatives which should have been taken some years back, but because of the extra regional powers interference, these are delayed. These are also pushed to the agenda because of the extra regional powers. Now, this has to be understood by South Asian countries. The Quad and the Quad Plus, how would it sort of, I think, will be one of the very serious discussion points, and countries like Sri Lanka, I mean, would be sort of told about the importance of being partners with the the rules-based the order, as well as the like-minded allies. So while China has been discussed in many forums on the infrastructure, mainly on Sri Lankan infrastructure, as a debt trap diplomacy carried out by the Chinese, predatory loans, not much is discussed about China's inroads into its political sphere, into its society. It's not much is discussed. So here I give you a few examples of the recent activities by China. The Chinese Communist Party with the SLPP, the Rajapaksa, the political party, where they had this very successful seminar, where after the seminar, where the government's political strategist, Basil Rajapaksa, clearly mentions that Chinese model is the way to go than any other model. This is the best economic model that we could adopt. Now, here is a party, the Communist Party, which is celebrating its centenary this year, and will be projecting this in the many developing countries. It's a success, it's economic success. So political parties who are in power, especially the majoritarian governments who are supporting this, would sort of see a significant Chinese influence, basically touching their political sphere, and also narrating reforms within the country and executing reforms. Here are another two examples. I have the Pathfinder, which is a private think tank, but it has, I would say, a Rajapaksa who advised Rajapaksa on many policy decisions, has clearly tied up with the Communist Party of China, the CRF, you can see from this article. And also Huawei, who was who basically says that the Huawei their strategic partnerships develop. So there are think tanks who are advising the government, also, which has a footprint of the Chinese Communist Party. So these are inroads of the Chinese Communist Party in developing countries. The Leninist structure in China has to be clearly understood, how it sort of, although it is said communist, but China is more open, but with a strict Leninist structure, which is an experiment which is going on in China. So developing countries need to be careful of what prescriptions that you would take from China on reforms, because I think this is my personal observation, that China is also still experimenting with their model and on their political model. The Chinese infrastructure diplomacy carried out, as you know, the accepting the vistas of prosperity, which is the Gotabaya Rajapaksa the political manifesto, and saying that it would fully support, where Shiv Shankar Menon clearly makes a very interesting comment in one of his talks recently, saying that for the first time, he sees that China intervening in the domestic politics before the elections of Gotabaya Rajapaksa, which means China has already selected their candidate, according to him, before the elections. So, which is a very interesting observation. Um, while there's much discussion of the debt trap, and then there is government narrative saying that, look, it's the volume is not so much. The volume, the Chinese debt volume is less than the other private debts, sovereign bonds, for example. That's not the argument. The argument is should be the differences between those loans as well as the Chinese loans. Is there an opaqueness? Yes, there is an opaqueness on terms and conditionality. I think that needs to be studied more, and that needs to be open to the public, such as the recent visit where young Justy, the ambassador, the senior ambassador who came to meet Gotabaya Rajapaksa, who pledged $400 million. So now this 400 million, which has come to, whether it has come to Sri Lanka or what are the terms, I think the people should know about it. And this is really important, that the terms and conditionality should be transparent. The expected return from these investments are really, really important, where people are trying to sort of see large infrastructure projects done, but where is the return from this infrastructure? I think this goes to many countries, not only Sri Lanka. I've visited, for example, in the Central Asia, many projects that has been done in South America. So where is the return for the large infrastructure projects? Some of the projects actually frighten the strategic circles, such as in India, whether Hambantota is a long-term strategic project, not a short-term, development project where why the revenue is sort of is not there in the short term, is a question, such as where Professor Swaran Singh clearly highlights this the factor. Where the Rajapaksa's project China is quite interesting, how they project China. In their own election campaigns, such as Namal Rajapaksa, I bring here, the son of Mahinda Rajapaksa, who basically take he scores the highest preferential votes in the South, Deep South, where his father was also contesting back then. It clearly mentions that he will take the agenda which was carried forward by his father, taken from his father, and then he would carry forward to make the Sri Lanka's next financial capital. That's quite interesting. And with highways, strategic ports, international airports, they're already there, the infrastructure, but they're not fully functioning. But will there be a time that this sort of the promise which has been given to the public, would it happen? Will China sort of make it? Looking at the cases in different parts of the world, I think China could make that investment. There is no reason why China would not make that investment to make it happen. And this significant imprint needs to be understood by the policy circle very clearly, because China is here to stay and stay for a long time. They're not here to do an investment and just move off, but here for a long term. That has to be clearly understood. Now, this particular factor where China is here to stay for a long time is been discussed by an entire chapter from in my new book, The Conundrum of an Island, which was published in Singapore a few days ago, but it'll be available next month. So Mahinda, which is the President Mahinda Rajapaksa's foreign policy, and Gotabaya Rajapaksa's foreign policy, if you compare it, there's not much of difference. It's the same. Non-aligned principles, balance, they use that. But here they use the phrases interchangeably, referring to the same idea, although the phrases mean differently in the international relations context. But here in the political manifestos, what they mean is the same idea. Basically, equidistance they use, neutral they use, although they are different concepts. But what they're trying to say is that we will not get entangled with big power struggles. or big powers. But the question should be, will the big powers leave Sri Lanka? It won't leave Sri Lanka, according to my writings, because the significant geostrategic position of Sri Lanka. Um, uh, India, being a civilizational nation, which is large geography, has an influence to its periphery, a significant influence. So civilizational states, usually like China or Iran, has their influence to its neighbors, its immediate neighbors. So Sri Lanka would have to face that, and India has a factor which is the Tamilian factor coming in. I'll come to that. So here, what I'm trying to say is that Sri Lanka, although non-aligned is mentioned because of its ancient past, it has been still referred, but it is not non-aligned. It is like the Pakistani High Commissioner in Sri Lanka. Clearly, he mentions this. He identifies it. The typical non-aligned status is almost unworkable, and the leadership has to make choices in the best interest of its sovereignty and economic prosperity. So here he's been a very realist in his perspective, which the Sri Lankan should take that, a more multi-aligned, a broad-based realist policy. That's what Sri Lanka should adopt. Here, more than we speak about binaries always, that China, US, China, US, BRI or Indo-Pacific, BRI, Indo-Pacific, and this is the discussion. Why can't we move out of that? The binaries, this is from work of Kaushikan, Bilhari Kaushikan, saying that this is a psychological trap, where he says it's a false binary. And I kind of agree with his thinking, where the Australian scholar Rory Medcalf has also mentioned that we are kind of trapped in a false binary. So we need to get out of that. There are many middle powers we can work with, and we should explore that rather than talking on these binaries always and weighing it on these binaries. What happens when the influence go out of control? Now, this is really, really important, where Sri Lanka is a case where we have not managed to properly sort of balance it or balance the influence. So here is an incident where Chinese submarines come into Colombo, which became a serious issue to India, New Delhi, where the Doval, or the Indian intelligence, the head of the National Security Advisor in India, got involved with the Secretary of Defense, who was actually back then, he was the president of Sri Lanka, who was Secretary of Defense back then. So on this situation, whether China is making inroads, whether they are sort of having a military footprint in Sri Lanka, such as places in Djibouti, is there sort of an idea? So here is a situation where influences go out of control. But India actually does respond in a strategic way to most of the influences. I mean, if you look at it, it is a power that has a significant imprint in the Indian Ocean, its territory. So it has basically as a net security provider in the Indian Ocean. Where this is Rajapaksa, after losing his elections, where he clearly blames the Indian intelligence, saying that they were the ones who were behind my loss. The same pattern could be seen in the next president, which is Sirisena, who blamed in the last few months of his tenure, where he blames India for an assassination plot on his life. And these are vectors which we cannot sort of ignore, because there are statements made by our head of states in our country. So I bring in to my work as important factors. the India's relationship with Sri Lanka is, I call it the Kaveri Delta influence, which is coming from the ancient time, the Tamilian Delta, the Dravidian influence to the north of the island. Now, the Indo-Lanka Accord was signed basically to give relief to a solution, a political solution, a devolution of power. As you could see, the recent comments which was made by Jai Shankar in his visit, in his last visit, he said the importance of 13th Amendment, which was the Indo-Lanka Accord, referring to that, and it's important to implement it fully. Now, he mentions this because of the upcoming UNHRC, the Human Rights Council in March, and also because Sri Lanka withdrew from the UNHRC, and the Gotabaya Rajapaksa saying that, you know, they would have a local mechanism than getting involved in UNHRC. I think it is wrong to do that. It's important that you are working with the international community for solutions. The South Indian elections, which is coming up, Sri Lankan case is always highlighted during the South Indian elections. So this is another factor. Strong rejection from the Gotabaya Rajapaksa's own minister of devolution of power, or the Minister for Provincial Council. He's saying that he is not for the Provincial Council. Now, this is a very strong statement coming from his own minister, which obviously does not, this is the minister, Abeyagoonasekera. He is saying that there's no right for India to interfere. So again, what needs to be understood is the Kaveri Delta influence, the civilization footprint. From 2009, we are looking at talking about reconciliation multiple times by multiple foreign ministers in the international forum, giving different narratives, but it is not fulfilled. And this is, there is actually, we lack genuine reconciliation process in the country. So multiple, I think, multiple times since it has been sort of let down, and you have a serious concern from the Tamilian political parties, the Tamilian community that is coming up. And this actually goes down, this is Chief Minister's recent statement of demolishing on a symbolic war memorial, which was in the Jaffna University. So you can see the Chief Minister of Tamil Nadu making a statement saying that you cannot do that, and that's really, really wrong. And obviously, I think it is wrong, where Sri Lanka would need sort of to see a more progressive and also a more genuine approach on reconciliation, because you cannot choose and do reconciliation. You would have to reconcile with the former LTT cadres, the diaspora. So there is a huge, I think, a spectrum. So I'll quickly, I think I took a lot of time. So I will skip this one, the Indian foreign policy, which is how sort of they, I'll leave the slides on the Indian foreign policy to its literals. I think their foreign policy to the literals is really, really important, how it sort of intervene, or how it sort of influence the foreign policy of their own country. With my last slide on creating an equilibrium is a way forward. How do we do that? The internal interference of China or India or the United States, you clearly understood from my slides, there is internal interference from these powers. Preserving geopolitical equilibrium in Sri Lanka could actively contribute to a rules-based order in Indian Ocean. Now, how do we do that? By referring to Sri Lanka's commitment to the law of the sea in the past, the Indian Ocean Zone for Peace, Sri Lanka has tremendously committed back in the past to foreign rules-based order. It's not something that we need to do it something from scratch. It's something that we need to refer and sort of bring back. But when we do that, we should be able to question, as well as we should be able to basically speak frankly on the what we sort of value. And here is a case that even in the South China Sea, I bring you this, where Singapore pointed out some of the pointed out to China, and but has good connections with China. And so this is an example I could bring it to you. More buck passing, which is this is from Mersheimer's work on buck passing, where balancing nations. So more we have, more it's better that you have stability, regional stability. Political environment need to be transparent. Bringing in different models without understanding the long-term repercussions is dangerous to our society. So more transparent. I know that I don't know whether you know that Sri Lanka is going through constitutional reforms. We did have a 20th Amendment, but they're having a total constitutional reform. These are very sensitive areas, and sort of should be looked. The geopolitics should be looked at, and balancing the triple spheres of influence with a sort of more broad-based, realist approach than hedging, basically. So we satisfy when the Chinese come, we satisfy the Chinese. When the US come, we tell them we are with the Indo-Pacific. One of your questions in the concept note was that. So rather than hedging, we could clearly articulate our policy and move forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comprehensive talk on this subject. Before we proceed to the question answer session, I would request everyone to please switch on their cameras for a photograph. It's done. Thank you very much. Now we move towards the next session, that is a question answer session. I take the opportunity to ask the first question, that is that hedging foreign policy has, very well its own limitations, and Colombo needs to get really rid of this binary choices between the United States and China. One possible solution that you have suggested in your articles many a time, that is there is a middle power alliance which Colombo can make its choices. So don't you think that the regional proximities and the revival of regional integration model will serve the purpose? I'm talking about the SAARC, revival of the SAARC, and alliances with the smaller states like Nepal, Bhutan, Sri Lanka, and Bangladesh. These smaller states can unite and resist, and can have a uniform voice against the geopolitical big power maneuvering in the Indian Ocean. What do you think?
Yes, that's a very important question. Thank you for that. Definitely, it is the way forward. I don't see how minilaterals would work to an extent, but minilaterals would not capture the entire regional view. India, Sri Lanka, Maldives on counterterrorism is a one dimension, but when you get the other countries of the region on board, that's a wider dimension. which lacks in South Asia. Those deaths we had the Easter Sunday would have not happened. That bombs would have not triggered if we had the regional security architectures in place. If our leaders invested more on the structures. Now, even signing that multilateral, the tripartite, from the last one was on 2014. So from 14 to 20, 6 years, it was absent because, now I'll be frank with with this audience, because the Chinese influence in Maldives. That was the reason that from 2014 to 2020, why the three countries, or probably, these are areas that it's going back and forth in our everyday sort of political dialogues, but investing it, leaders speaking about it in the time that SARC, which is an amazing regional body invested by so many people, um, there is no alternative to SARC. I don't see any alternative created to SARC. What you need is to invest on these institutions. Conflict resolution mechanisms should be built to this, and we should move out. Like I said, it has a civilizational footprint geographically. We as small countries, in the periphery, we do understand that. And I think with mutual respect, we can build regionalism. Without there is a significant distrust among countries, and that we are hedging, kind of not in our internal foreign policies, but again hedging with each and others. I think you cannot find a regional sort of voice in that environment. So India's investment in it. Sagar is good. When Prime Minister Modi mentioned Sagar in 2015, I wrote in PM Modi's one of his initial books, Modi Doctrine, India's foreign policy. One chapter was written. I mentioned the importance of Sagar connecting even littorals such as Sri Lanka. So without a broader connectivity, connection to sort of the region, exclusion of certain countries we would not find a region. So, yeah.
Thank you. There is a raise hand option in the participant panel. If somebody wants to ask a question, just click on the raise hand option in the right corner of the participant panel. So another question I would like to ask from you, that Pakistan respects Sri Lanka's sovereignty, and also Pakistan enjoys good relations with Sri Lanka. India, on the other hand, has been also maintaining a good relations with Sri Lanka. In the evolving situation, Islamabad is only concerned with the Indian maneuvering that can affect Pakistan-Sri Lankan relations in the long run. Do you think situation will emerge where India can pressurize Colombo to sideline Pakistan and Sri Lankan relationship? You know very well Pakistan has close relation with China, and which is also problematic. So what do you think?
I read some of the pieces on your CPEC, so and your recent articles also. So I relate some of the problems that you're having with our infrastructure projects also. Pakistan and Sri Lanka has very strong relationship. Pakistan's contribution especially during the ethnic conflict, when Sri Lanka was in need of assistance, Pakistan has always been with Sri Lanka. And on the internal interference, like the big powers, Pakistan does not have. clearly and in Sri Lanka. So there is on trade, there's a huge, I think, the potential that the two countries can grow. When the infrastructures come, I mean, basically come into full potential, as well as there was a paper done by one of my researchers on when the CPEC is fully active, or how would it sort of even affect countries like Sri Lanka. So she found in her quantification analysis that Sri Lanka would benefit immensely. And so these, I think it is really, Pakistan, Sri Lanka is much more the relationship. I don't think that the India or Indian influence in Sri Lanka would sort of, affect Pakistan, but it would affect the relationship with China. Because as you can, I shared with you the document of the declassified document, because it is a role that has been passed from, I mean, from the US to India because of a strong relationship. How do you sort of, what the role that India needs to play in the region? So obviously this, I mean, clear targeting China.
Thank you very much, Asanga, for your comprehensive answer. One of my colleague, Humaira Iqbal, a senior colleague, she studies and research on India. She has a question from you. Over to Humaira Iqbal.
Thank you so much, Mr. Sangha, for a well-articulated presentation. I wanted to know about Sri Lanka's role, which is a very significant role in the contemporary maritime game of strategic influence. So how do you see Indo-Chinese maritime competition in the Indian Ocean for Sri Lanka, while having strong military relationships with China, and for the regional future scenario?
Um, yeah, I think it's a very important question because Sri Lanka is a maritime nation. What we have is right now a significant, I call it, I mean, referring to the work of Raja Mohan, the triangular projections of the maritime powers, the China, India, and the United States in the littorals, and Sri Lanka is at the top of it in the Indian Ocean of the list of priorities because of multiple agreements. But here is a regime, a Rajapaksa regime. We have to understand that most of the US agreements, such as the SOFA Status Force Agreement, is being shelved. The Millennium Challenge Corporation, the development aid, it has been withdrawn from Sri Lanka. But your multiple agreements been taken forward with China. So you see the relationship building with China in a stronger way than the Indo-Pacific or the US, I would say, the agreements that is in place. But while India is, signing multiple agreements, the CONCAS or the MOA, the recent agreement. And so this will have effect to maritime nations like Sri Lanka. We have been clear on the policymakers about that we will never give our infrastructure for military use, such as our ports. But the question comes from basically extra-regional powers that whether Sri Lanka would be able to ward off that pressure when it comes to a time that when they want, because of the weak economy of Sri Lanka. Right now, Sri Lankan economy, as you know, 90% of our revenues go for servicing of debts, which has been borrowed. It's a serious economic situation right now, I would say, especially with the pandemic. So we've been hit very hard. And so here, Sri Lanka does not have a massive frigate or it doesn't have its naval power. So you have the neighbor, closest neighbor, India, building a massive frigate, submarines, more than 200 odd basically. Yeah, so you see a development of its maritime capacity, the capability, the I think the India, especially on working with its littorals to improve its fusion center, on collecting maritime information, while China is also doing quite a very, I would say, a very sophisticated, in a different manner. The recent, the underwater, the submerged, the the submarines type, the underwater vessels that was found in Indonesia on the basically gathering the undersea information by the Chinese clearly highlights the importance and the investment made by China in the Indian Ocean. So these are factors that actually we should take in, and these are areas because China, as you, I mean, the strategy would be quite, I would say, tense between the countries because the tension between India and China is quite high. My projection is even the border tensions could sort of flow to the south, which is the southern Indian, I mean, I would say the Indian Ocean, not only in the borders, but in the Indian Ocean also. So if we sort of, I think, like Imran mentioned earlier, a regional security architecture, an absence of it is a serious issue. So even on the maritime domain, here I think Sri Lanka is pivotal in when it talks about the littorals, and so what Maldives does, for example, one on the relationship which now Maldives signed the SOFA, as you know, with the United States. Here, Sri Lanka, Rajapaksa's, while sort of refusing to sign these agreements, he's sort of projected in a sort of a more vulnerable position. So I think these sentiments has to be taken in very carefully. Yeah, I hope I answered your question.
Thank you very much. I have another question from my colleague Nabila Jaffer in a chat panel. She says, thank you so much for your excellent talk. To substantiate claims on debt trap propaganda against China's BRI, the Western media gives the example of Hambantota port, which is leased by China. How the general public in Sri Lanka view the debt trap propaganda against China's infrastructural investments in Sri Lanka? Over to you.
Yeah. No, the debt trap has been discussed by many forums in the Western media as well as many. So whether Sri Lanka is on trap, that's like I mentioned in my presentation. It's not the volume where the government tried to get out of this whole debt trap is because saying that look, the volume is not so large. The volume is smaller than the sovereign bonds and the other borrowings. But like I mentioned, opaqueness makes it a trap. The lack of transparency makes it a trap. Because here is a country, China is a rising nation, making inroads to many countries, even to faraway geographies like in Latin America. So are they coming for what China says there is no strategic, where you don't have any strategic mindset behind, but we are coming in for economic development. So which is quite hard to many countries to believe. So whether there is a debt trap in Sri Lanka, yes, to an extent, because of the opaqueness and the lack of transparency, which China needs to improve in its processes. Because here is, I mean, last time China ruled the entire, I would say, back in the Qing dynasty, Sri Lanka was paying tribute. It was a tributary state, many tributary states, and Sri Lanka was one of them. So here is a time that China is coming back. But some are comparing to that era, which is quite wrong. I mean, I don't agree that China is coming doing colonialism like the British, or they are completely different two contexts. So you would have to understand what China is. China is more multilaterally engaged. China is speaking much more about values of trade. China is actually, that's why I mentioned earlier that although it's communist, with this linear structure, but then how much is it open? One scholar, a Chinese scholar, mentioned that back in the Raisina dialogue last year, that China benefited immensely from the liberal values. Now that's a quote I would love to sort of tell China. I mean, they did benefit immensely. They wouldn't have sort of come to this position if they didn't have the liberal trade values. So they here, I think it's really important that we understand these issues, and that Sri Lanka policymakers should, for example, Gotabaya Rajapaksa clearly mentioned pre-election. Before the election, he said that he will revisit the Hambantota port deal, and he will negotiate, and probably, so that was very popular during the election time. Here's a lead. But these are already signed and sealed, so you can't revisit any of them. Then he mentioned post-election that you wouldn't sort of do this sort of what the previous government did in future. Now that's a more sensible comment to make, because here is strategic choices made and revisiting strategic choices made by our policymakers. There is a danger in that. ECT, the terminal which I mentioned, was a strategic choice we made back in the previous government, but then revisiting it is I mean, these are serious danger to our relationship. So we need to make much better strategic choices with our external partners.
Thank you very much. One of the participants, Amir Iqbal, wants to ask a question. Over to Amir Iqbal.
Thank you so much, sir, for your comprehensive presentation. Sir, I want my question is related to the previous question also. As per the debt trap propaganda that propagating by especially India in the region and the Western power, sir, the current government is showed some intention to revisit the previous agreements is after the incident of Hambantota port. So if Sri Lanka go with the same agreements, so it will more burden their economy, because it's definitely it's look like that Sri Lanka will not be able to repay the agreement cost. So what will the best option for the current government, whether to go with the same projects with the previous government already agreed, or to revisit them?
There's no way of, I mean, you can revisit the agreements, but how do you amend it? How do you tell an external power that we will be not giving to you, but giving to the next particular power? So this is where I said the strategic choices are made. Now, when the Sirisena government, which is the previous government, came to power, Vikram Singh Sirisena government in 2015, what they said is that they will investigate all the projects, they will make amends, they will make reforms, they will do. So they suspended several projects for a few months, which again became a huge burden, because it was another addition that we'd have to pay for suspension of a project, like the port city in Colombo by the Chinese projects. So here is a prime minister who mentioned that back then, and then after a few months, he said that the BRI is the best thing that happened to Sri Lanka. I mean, so here, I mean, you can't sort of revisit certain projects. I think once it's a strategic choice, it has been signed, especially when it's signed, it's a legal document. So I don't think there is a provision for a country like Sri Lanka with its ailing economy, without much strategic sort of muscle build. So I don't think that we can sort of tell them that, you know, we will be looking at another partner, and we haven't. I mean, in the last few years, we haven't. We've said it rhetorically, politically, but then no, it's impossible. So I think that's not possible. Now, here is a very important question you raised. Now, Maldives went with the Huawei 5G. I bring a completely different picture. Now, Sri Lanka, the proposal is given by Huawei on the 5G. Would Sri Lanka go with the 5G? If it does, then there is no way of that you know, revisiting back again these agreements. So once it's gone, it's gone. So what is our policy towards? I mean, even a Chinese software like TikTok. I mean, these actually matters when it comes to what are the policies taken, what are the decisions taken. So by the country. So again, one of the interesting for countries like, you know, smaller nations, I would like to quote the Singaporean Prime Minister, where he said that if I need to evaluate like this, I have to evaluate all the products. I can't do that. He said that. I mean, he mentioned that at the one of the main dialogues I was present. He said that these evaluations I cannot do. So his strategic choice is that I can't evaluate basically Huawei. If I go to evaluate Huawei, I'm going to evaluate all other products also. That's his answer. So it's important that you make choices and you stick to it. Because you lose a lot when you suspend it. You lose a lot when the ECT, for example, Eastern Container Terminal, is not functioning. So you need to sort of get things moving. Countries like us cannot afford to do that.
Thank you very much. Due to time constraint, I will take only two more questions. One question from the participant panel, that is Inamullah Marvat. He wants to ask a question. Over to Inamullah Marvat.
Yeah, first of all, thank you so much for such a comprehensive presentation. I just want to ask, like, from your presentation, what I took away that is like China, Sri Lanka is at the center of these global powers, and you know, Sri Lanka is trying its best to get the maximum out of it by navigating among these global powers. I just want to ask, like, how this navigation is translating itself domestically. Like, I mean, is it easy for Sri Lanka to go along with these different powers simultaneously, or has it made the society more polarized in nature? Like, I mean, domestically, what kind of situation is there domestically in Sri Lanka? Thank you so much.
Yeah, very important question. Thank you for that. How foreign policy sort of affects the domestic policy. It has a serious effect on Sri Lankan foreign policy. Always affects the domestic political, environment. Basically, that's why I mentioned about the Tamil Nadu effect, the Tamilian effect. It is a grievance in our society, needs to be addressed. So it has direct connection to domestic policies, and it does interfere. Basically has influence the domestic policies. How the domestic basically the general public view whether Sri Lanka is the debt trap, whether we are in a debt trap, or whether we should be with the larger Indo-Pacific or the rules-based order. I think the general perception of the public is that there is no, they're not sort of more concerned about the Chinese debt, or they're more focused about the development prospect, because China has already shown to the people of Sri Lanka, the general public. For example, the highways. One of the first highways was the freeways that done from the south was from China. general public is benefiting. People are seeing what Chinese have done, the development. But again, some of the projects, as I mentioned, that the revenue is not flowing in, that needs to be, addressed by China and Sri Lanka. So these are choices made by Sri Lanka. It's not that the Chinese made the choices. Sri Lankan wanted these infrastructure projects. We wanted an airport in the south, an international airport. So that if the flights doesn't come for the last 4 years, or one flight comes in, so that's our problem. It's not, we cannot blame China. So we have to blame ourselves, our business models. So the domestic perception of China is, they don't have a sort of a very negative perception on China, but they do believe, the general public, the importance of democratic values. Sri Lanka has been a country, if you look at the political environment of Sri Lanka, we have gone through multiple, like the coups, which were the constitutional coup, which we had, and some multiple political issues we had in the past. But we managed to sort of bounce back to the to sort of protect our democratic values. So in that context, the United States is, and also the democratic liberal values cherished are really important. So the nations who are advocating on open governance, on basically, are really important, and people do appreciate those things in Sri Lanka. So it's sort of a more balanced, but not the perception. Obviously, the Western media projects that the hostile, the Chinese hostility, it doesn't exist in Sri Lanka. It's not there.
Thank you very much. I read the last question in the chat panel, that is from Huma Rahman. She says, thank you, Mr. Asanga, for a very apt and well-analyzed presentation. My question is related to the possibility of thinking about confidence-building measures to address these maritime and other issues. Over to you, Asanga.
Definitely, the CBM measures are really, really important, and we should invest more in the CBM measures. And if you look at on the piracy issues, or narcotic issues, or there's so much going on. If you look at it, every month we have issues on drug trafficking, and so various issues are projected in the media. So what we need is investment in these areas, and so for that, I think the best way to go, if a regional mechanism is absent, so we have to look at unilaterals, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, and perhaps we could have another littoral in play, and sort of build our capacity. And the absence of the CBM, or confidence building mechanisms, or a lack of investment is a serious issue for regional security.
Thank you. I will end up the conference over here with a short question, in which I would just wants to have a answer in yes or no from Asanga. The scholarship on Colombo's foreign policy is divided on China and India. In this context, the Colombo's India first approach is a diplomatic stunt, or really a strategic shift towards New Delhi, or is just a mere verbal assurance that bilateral relationship with India will not be deteriorated in the present circumstances? What's your short answer?
How do I answer that question in yes or no? Imran, you put in a very different. That's no. It's just rhetoric. It's just rhetoric. It has been referred back again by the Indian High Commissioner in Sri Lanka, saying that India first policy has been spoken about by the foreign secretary, but foreign secretary changed his posture after 2 weeks, saying that no, it's not India first, it's Sri Lanka first now. So you keep on doing that. You keep the problem is because we are hedging.
Thank you very much. It's really a pleasure to have you on this web conference and exclusive talk with you. And you comprehensively covered all the complexities surrounding around Sri Lanka. I would love to have you on another conference with you, possibly on your forthcoming book. I think it's not forthcoming; it has published, I think.
Yes, only in Singapore because the publisher is there, but next month it will be to the worldwide.
Thank you. With this, I will end up here. Thank you very much. And thank you everyone who participated in this web conference. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Imran. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thanks, everyone.